The snow had begun falling early that morning, blanketing the forest in a thick silence that was almost reverent. Trees, once tall and imposing, bowed under the weight of fresh snow and ice, their limbs swaying gently in the cold wind. The sky, an endless canvas of pale gray, hung heavy with clouds, promising more snow to come. The world outside the cabin was still, eerily so, as if holding its breath beneath winter's grip. Inside a small wooden cabin nestled deep within the forest, 20-year-old Claire Bennett sat curled in a faded armchair near the fireplace. The cabin had once belonged to her grandmother, a gentlewoman who had lived her final years in this very place, far removed from the chaos of the outside world. Claire had loved visiting as a child, mesmerized by the crackling of the fire, the scent of pine and cinnamon in the air, and the peace that seemed to wrap around her like a warm blanket. Now, years later, and after one of the most emotionally devastating years of her life, Claire had returned. She needed the quiet. She needed to escape the crowded city, the endless demands of people who didn't really know her, and the crushing grief of losing her mother. This cabin, with its creaky floorboards, aged bookshelves, and creaking window panes, was her last safe space. Golden firelight flickered off the polished wood walls, throwing long shadows that danced as the logs crackled. Claire held a steaming mug of hot cocoa in one hand, the other loosely gripping the spine of a novel she wasn't really reading. Wrapped in a hand-knit sweater and worn wool socks, she looked every bit the image of cozy solitude. That was when she heard it. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't loud, not insistent, but clear. 3 deliberate knocks. Claire's eyes snapped up from her book, every hair on her body standing on end. She waited. The fire crackled. The wind sighed against the cabin's eaves. She stood slowly, heart beginning to race. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and she hadn't seen a single soul since arriving over a week ago. There was no reason anyone should be knocking at her door. She tiptoed toward it, the old floorboards groaning beneath her steps. Another knock, not louder, not faster, just there. Claire pressed a hand to her chest, willing her heart to calm. She reached the door and paused, her fingers hovering over the handle. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was just a tree branch swaying too close to the porch. But as she opened the door with a soft creak, all her hopeful rationalizations vanished. No person stood there. Instead, there, in the white of the snow, stood a wolf. Its fur, a mix of deep gray, silver, and flecks of white, was caked with frost and snow. It was massive, at least 4 feet at the shoulder. It stood with one paw slightly lifted, and even in the dim porch light, she could see the crimson drip of blood against the pristine snow. Its golden eyes, intelligent and strange, met hers, and for a moment time stopped. The wolf didn't growl, didn't snarl, it didn't bare its teeth. Instead, it held her gaze as if it were waiting, as if it were silently pleading. Claire's instincts screamed at her to shut the door. She'd read enough about wild animals. Injured wolves were unpredictable, dangerous. But another voice inside her, a quieter one, urged her to look deeper. She whispered, "Are you hurt?" The wolf gave no response, only lowered its head slightly. Claire's breath fogged in the cold air. She glanced behind her into the warmth of the cabin, then back to the creature trembling in the snow. "I must be crazy," she murmured. Then she opened the door wider. The wolf stepped forward slowly, limping heavily on its injured leg. Its paw dragged slightly, leaving a dark trail behind. Claire stepped back as the animal crossed the threshold. Inside the warmth of the firelight, the wolf stopped, breathing heavily. Its chest rose and fell rapidly, each breath visible in the amber light. Claire quickly shut the door behind them and dropped the wooden bar across it. She stood still, heart pounding in her throat. The wolf turned its head slowly, scanning the room. It didn't seem aggressive, it didn't make a sound. Then, with great effort, it sank to the floor near the fire and let out a long, low breath, as if finally allowing itself to rest. Claire remained frozen. What was she supposed to do? Call animal control? There was no signal out here, and the road into town had been buried in snow for days. "Okay," she said softly, moving slowly to grab an old quilt from the arm of the couch. "You're hurt. I don't know how to help much, but I can try." The wolf watched her with those golden eyes, unblinking. She moved to the small first aid kit she kept in the kitchen. It wasn't much. Some bandages, antiseptic, tweezers. She knelt beside the wolf, cautious but firm. "I'm not going to hurt you," she murmured again. "Let me see." The wound was on the wolf's front paw, a deep gash likely from a trap or sharp rock. Claire gently cleaned the blood and dirt, and though the wolf winced, it didn't snap or growl. She wrapped the paw as best she could, her hands trembling from nerves and cold. "There," she whispered. "That's better." She backed away slowly and sat back in the armchair. The fire popped, casting light over the wolf's body, now stretched out on the braided rug. Despite herself, Claire smiled. "You're the strangest visitor I've ever had." For the first time in months, she didn't feel alone. As the wind howled and snow piled higher outside, the girl and the wolf sat in the warmth of the cabin. Two broken souls drawn together by chance, or perhaps something more. And in the silence, beneath the storm, a bond began to form. The wolf collapsed near the fireplace without a sound, its sides heaving with each breath. Claire stood frozen for a moment, torn between awe and uncertainty. Here she was, in a remote cabin, alone with a wild predator. Yet, in the warm, flickering light of the fire, the creature looked more weary than threatening, vulnerable. Snow dripped from its fur, forming tiny puddles on the wooden floor. One paw remained lifted off the ground, trembling slightly, the injury evident even without closer inspection. Blood had stained the white snow outside, and now it smeared across the floorboards like crimson paint. Claire's heart twisted at the sight. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed her grandmother's old medical kit from the cupboard, its leather cracked and faded with age. She knelt beside the wolf slowly, carefully, making sure not to make any sudden movements. It lifted its head slightly, golden eyes tracking her with cautious awareness. But it didn't growl, didn't move, just watched. "I'm not going to hurt you," Claire whispered, her voice barely audible above the roar of the wind outside. She opened the kit with shaky fingers, removing a bottle of antiseptic, gauze, and a roll of bandages. As she began cleaning the wound, the wolf let out a soft whimper, but didn't resist. She worked with gentle precision, wiping away the blood and ice, removing splinters and tiny bits of debris embedded in the gash. "I know it stings," she murmured, dabbing the antiseptic carefully. "But you'll feel better soon." The creature's breath hitched once, but then steadied, almost like it understood. Claire continued her work, occasionally glancing up into its eyes. They seemed too knowing, too aware. It was unnerving and oddly comforting at the same time. Once the leg was cleaned and wrapped, she sat back on her heels, letting out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The firelight danced across the wolf's fur, making it shimmer with shades of silver and gray. The storm outside had grown more violent, snow whipping against the windows like ghostly fingers. Claire stood and crossed to the bed, pulling off the thick quilt her grandmother had hand-stitched years ago. She returned and gently laid it over the wolf's body, careful not to jostle its injured leg. The animal didn't flinch. It simply laid its head on its paws and closed its eyes. She watched it for a long moment, then settled onto the floor beside it, legs tucked beneath her. The warmth of the fire mixed with the stillness in the room, creating an atmosphere that felt surreal, dreamlike. The contrast of the brutal storm outside and the quiet companionship inside made Claire feel as though time had slowed. She reached for the mug of cocoa she'd left on the small table earlier. It had gone cold, but she sipped it anyway, needing the comfort more than the heat. The silence between her and the wolf wasn't empty. It was filled with unspoken understanding. Then she began to talk. Not loudly, not in a rush, just small, honest pieces of herself spilling into the quiet. "My mom used to bring me here every summer," she said softly. "We'd hike during the day and play card games at night. I haven't been back in years, not until she passed." The wolf didn't move, but its ear flicked as if listening. Claire stared into the fire. "Everything just fell apart after that. I tried to keep going. Classes, friends, pretending to be okay, but I wasn't, so I packed up and came here." She paused, emotion tightening her throat. "I didn't think I'd find anyone here, let alone you." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. She smiled despite herself. "I guess we're both lost, huh?" Hours passed. The wind screamed outside, rattling the shutters, burying the cabin deeper in snow. Claire stayed awake, watching the wolf's breathing slow and steady. Her heart had stopped racing. The tension in her muscles had unwound. There was something incredibly grounding about the creature's presence. She told more stories, about her first love, her grandmother's cookies, the time she broke her arm trying to roller skate down a hill. Her words came easier now. The wolf didn't interrupt, didn't judge. It just listened. Eventually, fatigue crept in. Her body sagged with exhaustion, her eyes heavy. She curled on her side next to the wolf, the fire casting flickers of light on the ceiling. Her fingers, on instinct, drifted to the creature's fur. It was thick and coarse, but warm, alive. She rested her hand there and closed her eyes. The wolf shifted slightly but didn't move away. Its warmth seeped into her, and for the first time in weeks she felt safe. The wind howled on, but the cabin remained still. Inside, two souls, one human, one wild, found solace in each other's company. And as Claire slipped into sleep, she did so, knowing she wasn't alone anymore. When morning came, the snow would still cover the forest, the fire would still burn low, and trust, quiet and hard-won, would begin to bloom between the girl and the wolf. Golden light spilled through the frost-laced windows of the cabin, casting warm rays across the floorboards. It touched everything gently, the rough-hewn furniture, the stone hearth, the fur rug. The world, once consumed by storm and shadow, now shimmered in hues of gold and pale blue. A new day had come, and with it a fragile calm. Claire stirred under the quilt, her limbs stiff from sleeping on the hardwood floor. She blinked against the light, adjusting to the quiet stillness. The storm was gone. Only the faint crackle of dying embers and the steady rhythm of breath filled the room. She turned slightly and froze. The wolf was still there. Curled beside her, its massive body rose and fell in slow, steady breaths. Its fur glistened in the morning sun, the gray and white tones blending beautifully with the light. Its head rested close to her arm, golden eyes closed in what appeared to be peaceful sleep. Claire barely breathed, overcome with the sheer strangeness and beauty of it all. The wolf had stayed. She whispered, as if afraid to break the spell, "You stayed." The wolf twitched an ear in response and cracked one eye open, meeting her gaze. There was something familiar in that look, a trust that hadn't been there the night before. It closed its eye again, tail flicking slightly. Claire slowly pushed herself up, careful not to disturb him. Her joints ached from the cold floor, but her heart felt full in a way it hadn't in a long time. As she stretched, the room caught her eye. In the golden hush of morning, the cabin looked different. The shadows had lifted. The fear had faded. She went to the small kitchen, her bare feet padding across the floor. The stove still had some warmth, and she set to making breakfast. The sizzle of eggs, the scent of toasted bread, simple comforts she hadn't noticed she missed. Behind her, the wolf stirred. She turned to see him raise his head, ears forward, nose twitching at the smell of food. Claire smiled. She cut up some leftover meat she'd cooked the night before and placed it in a ceramic bowl, setting it a few feet away from the fire. The wolf rose slowly, favoring his injured leg, and limped toward the bowl. He sniffed it, then looked at her. "It's okay," she said, crouching nearby. "It's for you." He lowered his head and began to eat, not ravenously, but with appreciation. Claire sat cross-legged a few feet away, watching quietly. The trust between them was no longer fragile. It had deepened in the night, forged in the quiet hours of vulnerability and warmth. After breakfast, she returned to the fireplace, throwing on a few more logs. The wolf padded back to her side and lay down again, head resting near her thigh. She ran her fingers gently through his fur, feeling the heat of his body, the steady pulse of life. "I used to think I was fine alone," she said softly, "but I think I was just numb." The wolf looked up at her as if listening. She continued, her voice barely louder than the fire. "Losing Mom, dropping out, moving here. I thought if I disappeared, I wouldn't feel anything anymore. But last night, when I opened that door and saw you there, it was the first time I felt scared and alive." She sighed. "You reminded me that I can still care, that I still want to care." Outside, the snow glistened beneath the rising sun. Trees that had once bowed under the storm now shimmered in icy beauty. The forest no longer looked like a prison. It looked like freedom. Later, Claire found an old journal in her grandmother's desk. She dusted it off and began to write. About the storm, about the wolf, about how her heart, once so heavy, now beat with something more. She named him Shadow, not because he was dark or haunting, but because he had arrived with the storm and now followed her like a quiet guardian, not just through the snow, but through the shadows of her past. They spent the day together in quiet companionship. Shadow rested, occasionally looking up when Claire moved. She read aloud to him, her voice breaking the silence with stories and laughter. She cleaned his wound again, more thoroughly this time, and he didn't flinch. She took him outside for a short walk when the sun climbed higher. He moved slowly, carefully, but with determination. Claire stayed by his side the entire time, her boots crunching in the fresh snow as they circled the cabin. That night, the sky was clear. Stars blanketed the heavens, and a crescent moon hung low and watchful. Claire stood at the edge of the porch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, Shadow at her side. The wind was gentle, brushing strands of her hair across her face. She reached down, her hand resting on Shadow's broad head. "Thank you for knocking on my door," she whispered. He leaned into her touch. In that quiet moment, surrounded by snow, starlight, and the warmth of something unspoken, Claire realized she hadn't just rescued a wolf. He had rescued her too, and together they would face whatever storms came next, not as strangers but as kindred souls, forever changed by one night, one knock, and the bond born from survival and silence.